Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May God Almighty's divine peace and blessings and light and strength and support be with you, be with myself, be with us all. I'm just visiting a friend's place and I had a few moments and I wanted to shoot another video really quick just to kind of pick up and follow up on what I had begun to discuss last time when I was sharing, about my experiences with recovering from COVID, and specifically about fear and about death. So much of our lives are governed by fear. In fact, the entirety of our lives are governed by fear because we are in our heads, in our minds, in our thoughts, in the future. And the mind developed as an organ essentially for self-preservation, for survival. Its purpose is to seek out and identify threat, and that's what it does continually. Now, in the animal kingdom, at that basic level of consciousness, what I often refer to as level 1 state consciousness, what Allah Almighty describes in the Quran in this model as nafs al-amara. At that level, the mind is just dealing with immediate threat to its existence, right? If there's physical danger, it will try to evade in fight or flight. But aside from that, it's generally at peace. It's not thinking about the future. Animals don't sit and contemplate and worry about the rent or the bills or what will happen tomorrow or any of these things. They're in the present moment. But at level 2 state consciousness, nafs al-lawama in the Quran, we begin to, at this stage, at the man level of consciousness, mankind's level of consciousness, begin to develop a conceptual sense of self. And we begin to seek out threats to that sense of self. This is why insults, rejection, things that are not real at all affect us and hurt us so much, because they're threats to our survival, but not in the immediate, not in the present, but in the future, right? So for example, if you're rejected, if your reputation is ruined, this hurts us because it threatens our survival in the future. We think that we might be, excluded from the tribe, not supported, etc., right? This is all happening unconsciously, subconsciously. So at that level, level 2 state consciousness, which is kind of where humanity is stuck at, generally speaking, we are always overwhelmed with fear, with worry, with anxiety, with stress from the future. And then, of course, there's level 3 state consciousness, nafsul mutma'inna, which Allah Almighty describes in the Quran. Nafsul mutma'inna, the peaceful, contented, certain self, the state of heart, the state of being in which we are calm, at peace. Right? This is now moving into the level and the realm of the awliya of Allah. Right? This is the goal of the spiritual path, the goal of religion, to take us in that direction, to help us to advance forward, not to go backwards into the animal kingdom, but to go forwards beyond the level of mankind into the level of humanity. Right? And I talk about this a lot in the Eternal Warrior Way program in much more detail. But going back to this point that the mind is fundamentally concerned with identifying, seeking threats to survival, conceptual threats, theoretical threats, future threats. So the mind is never here and now. It's never in the present moment. It's constantly and continually occupied with the future. And in that state, we forget that we're all going to die and that it's all going to end, and it doesn't really matter in the end in terms of all of these things that we tend to be concerned about, all of these things that occupy our attention. If we could just anchor ourselves in the present moment, it's almost as if we would awaken from a dream life. And this is also one of the meanings of Sayyidina Ali when he said all human beings are asleep and that they awaken with death. So how to become fearless, right? Because we're constantly consumed by this state of fear, as generally speaking, as human beings, to different levels, to different degrees, based on your personal psychology, your circumstances, your environment, your upbringing, your conditioning, your programming, and so on. But how does one become fearless? The Prophet of Allah ﷺ said, remember death. Remember death often, because ultimately that is what we fear. More than anything, we fear death. All fear is a form of fear of death. The fear of rejection is a fear of death. All fears that we experience ultimately are what we perceive or what we understand in our mind to be threats to our survival. So the path to freedom, the path to fearlessness is embracing death. It's accepting death. If you read at all the study in the works of the great masters of Bushido, the way of the samurai, the way of the warrior, in the works of the great masters, you begin to see how much they emphasize embracing death, accepting that you're already dead, embracing and fully accepting the inevitability of death. That once a person does that, they actually become free and liberated to be the most effective in combat and in life. If you're in a battle, fighting with swords, and you're thinking, what'll happen to my children if I die? What'll happen about my business? What'll happen about my property? What'll happen about this? What will people say? What will people think? You're lost in your head. The majority of our attention, our focus, our energy is lost in thinking, and there's no way that we can be as effective, as quick, as efficient, as present and in the moment as somebody who is fully present. There's a beautiful scene in the movie The Last Samurai where they discuss this, and the man tells him, too many minds. You've got your mind in too many different directions. You've got to get present and focused. And when he gets that, he actually transcends to the level of a warrior and acts spontaneously in the moment and is absolutely and utterly effective in combat. And this translates also into life by being present, by freeing the mind from fear of the future, fear of what may happen. And the way to do that, according to the guidance and the wisdom of our Holy Prophet Sayyidina Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the last of the great messengers of God, who were taught to lead humanity to peace and to freedom and to their potential and to their purpose. He Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, remember death, embrace death, accept death. The great Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh, the companion of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and one of his four of his rightly guided khalifas, of his rightly guided successors, used to appoint a man to stand outside his door every day so that when he leaves the house to remind him, Ya Umar, you're going to die. Because we forget. And so this man was paid to stand outside his door and remind him. And think about this. Who does this? We in the modern world do the exact opposite. We want to push death as far away as possible and never think about it. Whereas the believers, the men of God, those who are fearless, they paid somebody to remind them, you're going to die. Spend this day wisely. You are going to die. Do what's important. You're going to die. Make peace with people, with your Lord. Today, don't put it off. You're going to die. Right? Any worship you need to do, any thanks you need to give, do it. Don't put it off. And so when Sayyidina Umar had a little bit of white in his beard, he came to the man and said, I no longer need you. Now when I see the white in my beard, I am reminded of death. This now is my reminder. And you see I saw amongst my shuyukh, their beards were often brilliant white at young ages because they were so close to the other world, right? To the remembrance of death, the acceptance of death. That spiritual energy infused them. And you could see it was reflected on their faces. And this then is the path to freedom, to fearlessness, the acceptance of death. It makes belief real. There's an interesting movie that I want to recommend, and it's actually called Fearless. This is starring Jeff Bridges, and it was made in 1996, so it's different from the Fearless that was made by the martial artist Jet Li. Fearless, starring Jeff Bridges, 1996. I don't want to give away too much of the movie, but in the film, he experiences a near-death experience. He has a near-death experience in the sense that not that he dies, but he faces absolutely the inevitability of death. He's going to die, right? He's in a plane crash and he's seeing the ground coming towards them, and this thought keeps going through his mind. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. This is it. And then when he finally accepts it, like there's this moment where his soul just accepts and surrenders to death. What then happens is profound. He has what would be called a spiritual awakening, and he's never the same. And the rest of the movie goes to show how he's now awakened to life, to a different level of living beyond the mind, beyond thinking. You've got to see this film. It's a great movie, and it shows what's possible. And the reward for death is life, right? Normally, we're so consumed by our thoughts, by thinking, by fear, by stress, by worry, by anxiety, by the world, that we're actually missing life completely. You can just see when, after he goes through this experience, when he bites into a strawberry, how full and rich the experience has become for him. Whereas for Most people, we eat completely unconsciously because we're not even there, right? We're already thinking about what to do next, or we're on our phones or watching TV or whatever. We're not present. We're always somewhere else. It's a great movie, and within it, there's this key, this secret to freedom, to fearlessness, to learning to live beyond fear. And it goes back to the timeless wisdom of our Prophet ﷺ, of the Prophet of Allah, the last great Prophet of Allah, in which he said, remember death, accept death, embrace death, make peace with death, the opposite of the culture and the programming and the conditioning of the world that we live in now, which is doing its best to avoid and to evade death. No, not the way of the believer. The believer embraces, accepts, and looks forward to a noble death, an honorable death, a death based in faith, in Iman, with Iman, a true death. And our whole lives are a preparation for death. In fact, we are born to die. Nobody can dispute this fact. From the moment we are born, we are dying. We are moving towards death. This is the destiny of every human being. So only a madman, a crazy person, will seek to turn their eyes away from their inevitable destiny. The intelligent one will prepare for that. And the great people of old, the great men of old, the great people of wisdom, of knowledge, of excellence, of valor, and of courage, they spent their lives preparing for death. That was it. They lived honorably, they lived nobly, they lived with excellence only in preparation for a good death, that Allah will grant them a good and honorable, noble death with His name on their tongue and in their hearts, inshallah. This is the path to fearlessness, to freedom, the embracing of death, making peace with death. And one of the things simply that we can do is just to sit quietly in a corner, maybe put a blanket over yourself, a shawl, a jubbah, a cloak, and just sit and remember and embrace death, accept death. Let go of everything. Let go of your attachments, your concerns, your worries, at least for 15, 20 minutes a day. Surrender. Accept death. And accept absolutely and unconditionally that Allah is Lord. He is in control. Whether you're here, whether you're not, the world will go on, or it will end when He wills. But it has nothing to do with you. And we carry nothing. We have to think of the great Prophet Abraham alayhi salam, when he was commanded to leave his wife and child in the open desert with no water. What kind of faith did that take? What kind of surrender, trust, belief did that take? Or to slaughter his son prior to that. What kind of absolute belief in God did that take? And inshallah, most of us, God willing, most of you don't have to be tested as such, but we will be tested to make our faith real. And herein is the key, the path, the secret to freedom. Remember death. Make peace with death. Embrace death. Accept it. And you will see that you begin to learn to live, inshallah, with God's grace, truly. Not wasting time on meaningless and worthless, ultimately meaningless and worthless goals and aspirations and things that have no value. And all of these things that we're consumed by are absolutely meaningless. You can't take any of it with you. Not the bank account, not the house, not the car, not the title, nothing. It means nothing. It's absolutely meaningless. The only thing we can take with us is love. It's the only thing that we take to the world beyond. The love that we cultivate in our hearts, the love for our Creator and the love for one another. And as the Prophet ﷺ said, that love transcends dimensions. That love transcends the barrier between this world and the next. It's one of the secrets of the other movie, Interstellar, which inshallah we'll talk about a little bit more later. I've discussed as well in the past. Love transcends time and space. Love transcends death. And the point of living is to learn how to love. And we can actually never truly love when we're preoccupied with self-preservation, with survival. That's all rooted in the self. It's all ego-based consciousness. The key to love is becoming selfless, and the key to becoming selfless is embracing death. It puts everything in perspective. Remember death, and through that spiritual intention and practice, inshallah, may Allah Almighty make us to be amongst the true believers, the people of faith, the people of fearlessness, the people whose hearts are free and awake. Ameen, inshallah ta'ala. To your divine and eternal success. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.